My family called me useless. She can't even work a computer, my son-in-law laughed. So they used my name to hide their fraud at work. But when the investigators asked who owned the emails, I stood up. The proof I handed over made them lose more than their jobs. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The scent of rosemary and roasted chicken should have been comforting. It was the scent of decades of Sunday dinners, a weekly ritual I had upheld long after my husband Richard had passed. It was meant to be a tether, a way of holding our small family together, but lately the scent had become a cloying perfume masking the rot of resentment that had seeped into the foundations of our lives. Today was no different. The table was set with my best china, the plates Richard and I had bought on our honeymoon, each one a small, tangible memory. My daughter Chloe sat opposite me, picking at her green beans with the nervous energy of a bird trapped in a cage. At 42, she was a bundle of anxieties, her face etched with the stress of a demanding career and a more demanding husband. That husband, Mark, sat at the head of the table, in Richard's chair. He had claimed it so naturally after Richard's death, a small symbolic coup that I had been too grief-stricken to contest. Now he filled it with an air of proprietary ownership, carving the chicken with a flourish that was more performance than skill. My grandson Leo was a quiet island in the middle of the simmering tension. At 16 he was more comfortable in the digital world than in this one, his thumbs often twitching as if holding an invisible controller. But he was here, and he always met my eyes with a warmth that was painfully absent in his parents' gazes. I cleared my throat, the silence having stretched on for too long. I was reading the most interesting article online today, I began, my voice a little reedy. It was about these new email scams. They're so clever, you see. They pretend to be from your bank. Before I could finish, a sound erupted from the head of the table. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a laugh. A full-throated, booming laugh that was so loud it made the cutlery vibrate. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated condescension. Mark leaned back in Richard's chair, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye with the back of his hand. "Oh, Agnes," he said, shaking his head as if I were a particularly amusing toddler. "Don't you worry your little head about email scams. You're perfectly safe." He looked from Chloe to Leo, drawing them into his cruel little joke. "She can't even work a computer." The words landed in the center of the table like a lead weight. The air, already thin, was sucked from the room. I saw Leo flinch, his eyes darting from his father to me, a flicker of anger in their depths. Chloe just stared at her plate, a flush of red creeping up her neck. She was embarrassed, not for her husband's cruelty, but for my perceived incompetence. For me, the insult itself wasn't the point. In a way he was right. My life had been one of ledgers and adding machines, of fountain pens and crisp, clean paper. I was a bookkeeper by trade, retired now for almost a decade. My world had been one of tangible numbers, of columns that had to balance, of a logic that was as solid and dependable as the ground beneath my feet. The digital world, with its clouds and streams and ethereal data, felt like a foreign country with a language I didn't speak. But the sting came from the dismissal. In that one laugh, Mark had erased my entire life. He had reduced a woman who had run the books for a thriving company for 40 years, who had managed a household, raised a daughter and navigated the complex finances of widowhood, to a single pathetic caricature, the useless old woman. I didn't say anything. I didn't cry or shout. I felt a lifetime of holding my tongue, of keeping a dignified peace, settle over me like a familiar shawl. But beneath the calm exterior something inside me shifted. It was not a loud dramatic snap but a quiet, cold and final click, like the tumbler of a lock falling into place. I looked at my son-in-law, his face still alight with amusement at my expense. I looked at my daughter who refused to meet my gaze. They saw me as a relic, a harmless technologically illiterate ghost haunting the corners of their modern lives. A ghost. The word echoed in my mind, and in that moment, I decided that if a ghost was what they wanted, then a ghost was precisely what they would get. I picked up my fork, and took a bite of chicken. It tasted like ash. I smiled. A small serene smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You're probably right, Mark," I said softly. "It's all a bit too complicated for me." The day after that disastrous Sunday dinner, I sat in my quiet living room, the silence a welcome reprieve. The insult from the night before hadn't faded. It had crystallized. It was a hard, cold shard of reality lodged in my heart. Mark's laughter was the symptom, but the disease was their perception of me. They had already buried me, consigning me to a past they had no interest in understanding. My eyes fell on the gift they had given me last Christmas. It was a sleek silver tablet, still in its pristine white box on the bookshelf. At the time, I'd seen it as a thoughtless, generic gift, a nod to the modern world they inhabited, and I supposedly didn't. It was easier than thinking about what I might actually want. Now, looking at it, I saw not an insult but a weapon, a tool, a key to the very world they believed I was locked out of. But I couldn't use it on my own. I needed a guide, an ally, and I knew just the person. I picked up my old landline phone, the familiar weight of the receiver a small comfort, and dialed Leo's mobile number. He answered on the second ring, his voice a little muffled. "Hey Grandma." "Leo, dear, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Nah, just finishing up some homework." "What's up?" I took a breath. "I was wondering if you might be able to help me with something. It's about that tablet you all gave me for Christmas. I think it's high time I learned how to use the thing." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a sound of genuine pleasure. "Really? That's awesome, Grandma. Of course I can help. I'd love to." His enthusiasm was a balm on my wounded pride. He didn't sound surprised or condescending. He sounded happy. We arranged for him to come over the following afternoon after school, under the guise of helping me with some gardening, a plausible excuse that wouldn't raise any suspicions with his parents. The next day Leo arrived with his backpack slung over one shoulder. We spent a token 20 minutes in the garden, pulling a few weeds from the rose bushes before retreating to the kitchen. He pulled the tablet from its box, its screen a perfect black mirror. He handled it with an innate confidence, his fingers gliding across the surface as he powered it on. "Okay," he said, pulling up a chair next to me at the kitchen table. "Let's start with the basics. This is how you unlock it. This is the home screen. These little pictures are called apps." His patience was extraordinary. He spoke clearly, without a hint of the frustration or impatience his parents so often displayed. He showed me how to connect to my Wi-Fi, a process that felt like performing a magic spell. He walked me through the settings, explaining what each function did in simple, understandable terms. He was a natural teacher, and I, it turned out, was a surprisingly eager student. My past as a bookkeeper, the very thing Mark had unknowingly mocked, became my greatest asset. My mind, trained for decades to follow procedures, to organize information, and to spot inconsistencies, latched onto the logic of the digital world. An operating system, I realized, was just another kind of ledger, a series of inputs and outputs that had to balance. We set up my first email account. Leo suggested a simple, straightforward address. I watched his fingers fly across the virtual keyboard, and then it was my turn. My own fingers felt clumsy and slow, but I pecked out my name, my password, my first ever digital identity. "There," he said with a proud smile as the welcome email from the service provider appeared in my inbox. "You're officially online, Grandma." That first lesson lasted for 2 hours. By the time Leo left, my head was swimming with new information, but I also felt a thrill, a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. I had opened a door to a world I had been told was not for me. That night, long after the house was dark, I sat at the kitchen table, the tablet glowing in front of me. I practiced unlocking the screen. I opened and closed the email app. I typed out a short message to my new address, and watched in amazement as it appeared in my own inbox a moment later. It was a small, simple act, but it felt monumental. Mark had laughed because he thought I was powerless, locked in an analog past. He had no idea that I had just been handed the key to his digital world. And I was a very, very fast learner. The secret alliance was formed, and the student was ready for her lessons to begin. A month passed. My lessons with Leo became a weekly ritual, a secret island of progress in the vast ocean of my family's dysfunction. I was growing more confident with each session, my initial fumbling replaced by a quiet competence. I could now browse the news, watch gardening tutorials, and most importantly, manage my email with an efficiency that would have surprised my family had they bothered to notice. The request, when it came, was so perfectly timed and so cleverly disguised that had I not been nursing a month of simmering resentment, I might have fallen for it completely. It was another Sunday. Not a full dinner this time, but a casual afternoon visit. Chloe and Mark arrived looking harried, their faces etched with the familiar lines of corporate stress. They brought a store-bought cake that sat on the counter like a peace offering for a war they didn't know we were fighting. They sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I took my secret lessons, and Chloe began, her voice carefully casual. Mom, we were hoping you could do us a small favor. It's a work thing. I poured them tea, my movements slow and deliberate, my expression one of mild, grandmotherly curiosity. Oh? What is it, dear? Mark took over, leaning forward with the smooth, practiced charm of a salesman closing a deal. It's just a bit of boring corporate policy, Agnes. Nothing to worry about. My company, our company, he corrected himself with a nod toward Chloe, has implemented a new data retention policy. It's a real headache. We have to create a separate archive for old client communications, and for compliance reasons it has to be held by a third-party non-employee. He paused, letting the meaningless corporate jargon settle in the air, designed to sound both important and incomprehensible. We were thinking, he continued, giving me a smile that was meant to be warm but felt predatory. Since you're retired and have no connection to the firm, you would be the perfect person. All we need to do is set up an email account in your name. We'll handle everything. Of course, we'll manage the archive, all the technical stuff. Your name would just be on the account as a formality. It would be a huge help to us, to the family. I looked from his earnest face to my daughter's. Chloe was twisting the handle of her teacup, her eyes pleading. It would really get Mark's boss off his back, Mom? She added, her voice small. It's just a name. It was a brilliant piece of manipulation. They had framed it not as a request for help with their work, but as a way for me, the useless old woman, to finally contribute something of value to the family. They were offering me a chance to be useful, a role they had so publicly denied me. And they had chosen the perfect bait. An email account. The very thing Mark had laughed about. It was a test of his own arrogance. He was so utterly convinced of my incompetence that he believed he could hide his secrets in the very medium he had mocked me for not understanding. He was building my prison out of materials he didn't know I could turn into a key. I pretended to be hesitant, to be confused by the technical terms. Oh, I don't know, Mark. It sounds very complicated. What if I do something wrong? You won't have to do a thing, Agnes, he said, his voice dripping with condescending reassurance. That's the beauty of it. You won't even have to look at it. We'll take care of everything. We just need your name. I let the silence stretch for a moment, enjoying the flicker of anxiety in his eyes. Then I gave them the answer they wanted to hear. Well, I said with a sigh, playing the part of the slightly bewildered but ultimately compliant mother. If it really helps you and Chloe, then of course, what do I need to do? The relief on their faces was palpable. Mark's charming smile returned, broader than ever. Chloe's shoulders, which had been hunched up around her ears, visibly relaxed. They thought they had just secured the perfect hiding place for their secrets. They had no idea they had just handed me the keys to their kingdom. The following Saturday Mark arrived alone. Chloe, he explained, was caught up at the office. He came armed with his sleek silver laptop and an air of performative patience, like a man stooping to explain a complex subject to a child. All right, Agnes, he said, setting up his computer on my kitchen table. Let's get this done. It won't take a minute. I sat beside him playing my part. I peered at the screen with a look of wide-eyed confusion, my hands clasped in my lap. I was the very picture of technological ineptitude, a woman for whom a login screen was as mysterious as an ancient rune. Mark, completely buying the act, reveled in his role as the tech-savvy savant. He walked me through the process of creating a new email account, his explanations deliberately oversimplified and patronizing. See, first we go to this website, he said, typing quickly, and then we click this little button here that says Create Account. Simple, right? He chose the email address himself. Agnes, read, archive, add, email.com. The name was a masterstroke of his own arrogance. It sounded official, boring, and utterly forgettable. It was the digital equivalent of a dusty old file cabinet in a forgotten basement. Now for the important part, he said, his voice dropping as if he were sharing a state secret. The password. We need something secure, but something you don't need to remember, since I'll be the one using it. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his eyes shielded so I couldn't see what he was typing. He was so confident in my ignorance that the idea I might know how to reset a password had never even crossed his mind. When he was done, he took a sticky note and a pen from his briefcase. He scribbled something on it and slid it across the table to me. Here, he said. This is the password for your records. Just put it somewhere safe, or don't. He added with a chuckle. It doesn't really matter. I looked down at the note. He had written "My useless mother-in-law." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was a private joke, a final twist of the knife, a secret password that also served as a constant reminder of his contempt for me. He was so certain I would never see it, or if I did, that I wouldn't understand its significance. I felt a cold hard knot of anger form in my stomach, but I kept my face a perfect mask of benign confusion. I folded the note carefully and tucked it into the pocket of my cardigan. "Thank you, Mark. That's very memorable." "It is, isn't it?" he said, completely missing the irony in my voice. He spent another few minutes showing me the empty inbox, the settings, the various folders he was creating, invoices, client comms, Project Alpha, all designed to look like a legitimate if boring corporate archive. "And that's it," he announced, closing his laptop with a satisfied snap. "You are now the proud owner of an email account you never have to look at. See? Painless." He stood up, ready to leave. His mission accomplished. "Thanks again for this, Agnes. You're a real lifesaver." "Anytime, dear," I said, my voice sweet as honey. "Anything for family." As I watched him walk out the door, my hand went to the sticky note in my pocket. He thought he had just created the perfect, impenetrable cover for his crimes. He had built a fortress and named it after my weakness, decorating its walls with his contempt. He saw himself as the master architect of a brilliant deception. He had no idea he had just handed the blueprints, the master key, and a written confession to the one person he should have feared the most. Mark's visit, with its casual cruelty and breathtaking arrogance, did not deter me. It fueled me. The sticky note with its hateful password became a talisman, a reminder of what was at stake. My weekly lessons with Leo took on a new urgency, a new focus. I was no longer just a grandmother learning a new skill to pass the time. I was a soldier preparing for battle. My request to Leo was simple and disguised in the language of grandmotherly caution. "Leo dear," I said one afternoon as we sat at the kitchen table, the tablet between us. "I was reading about those scams again and it mentioned something about people stealing your passwords. It's all very frightening. Could you show me how to protect myself? How do all these passwords and accounts work?" "Really?" Leo, ever the patient teacher, was happy to oblige. "That's a great question, Grandma. Account security is super important." He began to walk me through the architecture of the digital world. He showed me how to create strong, unique passwords, and more importantly, he showed me how they could be recovered. He guided me through the forgot password process on a dummy account he created for me. "See," he said, as a password reset link appeared in my primary email. "As long as you control the main email address, you can get into almost anything linked to it. It's like having a master key." A master key. The phrase resonated deep within me. I filed the information away, my mind so accustomed to cross-referencing and balancing accounts, creating a new mental ledger. Our lessons grew more advanced. I told him I wanted to organize the old family photos I had in shoeboxes under my bed. "Is there a way to save them on this cloud I keep hearing about?" I asked, feigning ignorance. Leo's eyes lit up. "Totally. Cloud storage is perfect for that. I can show you how to set up a Google Drive or a Dropbox. You can upload files, organize them into folders, and access them from anywhere." He showed me the process step by step. How to create folders, how to upload files, how to share them, or more importantly, how to keep them private and secure. My bookkeeper's mind, which loved order and categorization, took to it immediately. I saw not just a place for family photos, but a digital safe. A place to store evidence, meticulously organized and beyond anyone else's reach. My aptitude for this new world surprised even me. The logic that had governed my professional life, of checks and balances, of debits and credits, of following a procedure to its logical conclusion, was the same logic that underpinned the digital world. I wasn't just learning a series of disconnected skills, I was learning a new language, and I was becoming fluent with astonishing speed. Leo, for his part, was simply proud of his grandmother. He saw my rapid progress as a testament to his teaching skills and my own hidden intelligence. He had no idea of the true purpose of his lessons. He thought he was helping me connect with family and friends. In reality, he was teaching me how to build a case, how to gather evidence, how to become a digital detective. One afternoon, as he was showing me how to clear my browser history for privacy, he laughed. "You're getting so good at this, Grandma. Pretty soon you'll be teaching me a thing or two." I smiled. A genuine, warm smile. "I have a good teacher," I said, and I meant it. He couldn't see the cold resolve behind my eyes. He couldn't know that every lesson, every new skill I acquired, was another stone in the foundation of the reckoning that was to come. Mark had called me useless, a woman who couldn't even work a computer. He had no idea that I was becoming an expert, and soon, very soon I was going to use my newfound expertise to access the archive of his crimes. The time for passive learning was over. It was time to act. I waited for a quiet Tuesday afternoon, a day when I knew Chloe and Mark would be swamped at work, and Leo would be at after-school soccer practice. The house was mine, the silence a comforting blanket for the nerve-wracking task ahead. I sat at the kitchen table with my tablet, a cup of chamomile tea steaming beside me, though I knew it would do little to calm the frantic fluttering in my chest. My hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as I opened the web browser. I typed the URL for the email provider into the search bar, my fingers pecking slowly at the virtual keyboard. The login page appeared, clean and impersonal, asking for an email address and a password. I took a deep breath and typed in the address Mark had created, Agnes, Reed, archive@email.com. Then I moved the cursor to the password field. For a moment I considered typing in the hateful phrase from the sticky note. I imagined the system granting me access, the cruel joke becoming my key. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I wouldn't let his contempt be the tool of my victory. I would use my own knowledge, the skills Leo had so patiently taught me. My eyes found the small blue link beneath the login button. It was a link I had clicked a dozen times on dummy accounts, but this time it was real. This time it mattered. Forgot password. My finger hovered over the link. This was the point of no return. The moment I clicked this, a notification might be sent. Mark might know someone was trying to access the account, but I also knew from my lessons with Leo that such notifications often went to the account's recovery email or phone number. And who had set up the account? Mark. What recovery information would he have used? He was far too arrogant to use his own work or personal email. That would create a link. He would have set it up with no recovery options, or with a circular untraceable one. So certain was he that no one would ever try to get in. It was a gamble, but one I had to take. I tapped the screen. The next page asked how I wanted to reset my password. As I had suspected, there were no recovery emails or phone numbers listed. There was only one option, the last resort: answer your security questions. My heart sank. I didn't know the answers. Mark would have chosen things only he knew. But then I saw the questions he had selected, and I almost laughed out loud. His arrogance, his utter contempt for me was once again his undoing. The first question was, "What is your mother's maiden name?" He had used my own mother's name, a piece of my life he had repurposed for his deception. I typed in Thompson with a steady hand. The second question was, "What was the name of your first pet?" He had chosen his own first pet, a dog named Buddy, a story he had told at countless family dinners. He was so lazy, so self-absorbed, that he hadn't even bothered to invent new answers. He had used the most obvious ones, convinced they were secure simply because I was too incompetent to ever reach this screen. I typed Buddy. The final question was, "In what city were you born?" My city, not his. He had used my own personal information, weaving the truth of my life into the fabric of his lies. I typed Philadelphia. I hit submit. For a heart-stopping second, the screen showed a loading icon, a small spinning circle that held my future in its digital rotation, and then the screen changed. Create a new password. A wave of relief so powerful it left me breathless washed over me. I had done it. I typed in my new password, one of my own choosing, Justice for Richard 1948. Strong, secure, and deeply personal. The system accepted it, and then, the archive opened before me. It was no longer an abstract concept. It was a reality, a stark list of digital correspondence on the glowing screen. The inbox was filled with dozens of emails. My bookkeeper's eyes scanned the subject lines, and the blood in my veins ran cold. Project Nightingale final invoice. If WD came in transfer confirmation. Urgent consulting fee adjustment, Q3, rewrote shipment 7B, revised bill of lading. It was all there, a lexicon of corporate fraud spelled out in plain terrifying English. The numbers in the attached invoices were staggering, far beyond anything I could have imagined. This wasn't just skimming off the top. This was a systematic, sophisticated, multi-million-dollar deception, and my name, my good name, was attached to all of it. I closed my eyes for a moment, The enormity of what I had found pressing down on me. I had opened the door to their secret world. Now, it was time to meticulously document every single piece of incriminating evidence it contained. The initial shock of seeing the incriminating emails quickly gave way to a cold, methodical calm. This was a world I understood. Not the technology perhaps, but the content, the cryptic language, the doctored invoices, the hidden numbers. It was the dark mirror of the work I had done my entire life. I had spent 40 years making sure ledgers were balanced and accounts were transparent. Now I was faced with a set of books designed for the sole purpose of deception, and my old instincts took over with the force of a tidal wave. My first step was to secure my position. I couldn't risk Mark discovering I had been there. I navigated to the account settings, my fingers now moving with a newfound confidence. I found the section for login notifications and security alerts. As I had suspected, he had disabled all of them. His arrogance was my shield. My next step was to create my own secure location for the evidence. Following the steps Leo had taught me, I created a brand new, completely anonymous email account under a fictitious name, Jane Thompson. A nod to my mother, I also created a new secure cloud drive linking it to the Jane Thompson account. This would be my digital vault, my evidence locker. Then the real work began. I sat at my kitchen table for hours that first day and for many days after, turning my quiet home into a silent command center. I approached the task with the same meticulous discipline I had once applied to year-end audits. I didn't just browse, I archived. One by one, I opened each incriminating email in the Agnes Reid archive account. I read through the cryptic conversations, my mind automatically deciphering the coded language, consulting fees for shell corporations, project overages that corresponded with transfers to offshore accounts, shipment reroutes that involved phantom cargo and inflated insurance claims. For each email, I followed a strict three-step procedure. First, I forwarded the original email to my Jane Thompson account. This created a copy with all the original header information intact. The sender, the recipient, the exact time and date it was sent. This was the digital equivalent of a notarized document, an undeniable record. Second, I downloaded any attachments, the doctored invoices, the fake bills of lading, the falsified expense reports. My bookkeeper's eye for detail was invaluable. I could see where numbers had been altered, where signatures had been forged, where legitimate-looking documents had been created from whole cloth. I saved these files to my computer. Third, I uploaded these downloaded files to my secure cloud drive. I didn't just dump them in, I created a meticulous folder structure, mirroring the one Mark had created in the fraudulent account. I created folders labeled Project Nightingale, Cayman Transfers, Invoice Fraud, and so on. Inside each folder I placed the relevant documents, renaming each file with the date and a short description. 2025, 0412, Invoice 74B, Altered DT Act. 2025, 05, 03, Cayman Transfer Confirmation Thompson DT Act. It was a perfect damning mirror of his crimes, organized with the precision of a lifelong professional. I left no trace of my work. After each session I cleared my browser history, deleted the downloaded files from my tablet's local storage, and logged out. The Agnes Reid archive account remained exactly as Mark had left it, a sleeping dragon of evidence, completely unaware that its fire was being systematically siphoned away. Days turned into weeks. Every few afternoons I would log in, my heart still beating a little faster with the thrill of the illicit access, and repeat the process. More emails would have arrived, more threads in the tapestry of their fraud, and I would carefully, patiently archive every single one. I was no longer just Agnes Reid, the retired grandmother. I was a digital archivist, a silent historian of their downfall. I was building a case against my own family, one email at a time. The work was painstaking, emotionally draining, and utterly terrifying. But with every piece of evidence I saved, I felt a growing sense of grim satisfaction. They had used my name to hide their crimes. They had no idea I was using my mind to expose them. As spring warmed into early summer, a new pattern of behavior emerged in my son-in-law. His success, built on the rickety scaffolding of his fraud, had filled him with an intoxicating and deeply foolish sense of invincibility. His arrogance, always a prominent feature of his personality, metastasized. He became louder, more expansive, more openly contemptuous of those he considered his inferiors, a category that in his mind prominently featured me. The jokes at my expense, Once a semi-regular feature of our family gatherings became a constant refrain. My supposed technological ineptitude was his favorite punchline, a reliable gag he could pull out to entertain himself and underscore his own perceived brilliance. One Sunday he arrived for dinner brandishing a new top-of-the-line smartphone, its screen impossibly bright and large. He spent half the meal tapping and swiping at it, ignoring the conversation around him. "You should really get one of these, Agnes," he said suddenly, looking up at me with a smirk. "It's got a great feature for seniors. You just talk to it, and it does things for you. You wouldn't even have to learn how to type." I smiled placidly. "That sounds lovely, Mark, but I think I'll stick to my books." All the while my own tablet, hidden away in my bedroom, contained a cloud drive with over a gigabyte of meticulously organized evidence of his felony crimes. His favorite topic, however, was the archive account. He seemed to get a special perverse thrill from discussing it in front of me, knowing or believing that I was completely oblivious to its true nature. It was his way of flaunting his crime in plain sight, a testament to his own cleverness. The most galling incident occurred during a small family barbecue in my backyard. Mark, holding a beer and presiding over the grill, was in a particularly smug mood. He had just closed a big deal at work, a deal I knew from the emails I had archived just the day before, that was lubricated by a hefty illicit consulting fee funneled through my ghost account. He caught my eye as I was watering my petunias. "Hey Agnes," he called out, his voice loud enough for Chloe and Leo to hear. "How's the archiving going? Keeping all those important emails safe for me?" I simply nodded, giving him a vague pleasant smile. He wasn't finished. He turned to Leo, who was sitting on the porch steps, looking uncomfortable. "Your grandmother is my secret weapon at work, Leo," Mark said with a wink. "The most secure data vault in the world. No hacker would ever think to look in the email account of a woman who still thinks logging on involves putting wood in the fireplace." He roared with laughter at his own joke. Chloe, standing beside him, managed a weak, pained smile. Leo just stared at his father, his expression unreadable, and then looked at me, a question in his eyes. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible shake of my head. Not yet. The insult didn't sting anymore. It was just data. It was another piece of evidence, not of my incompetence, but of his hubris. Every condescending remark, every smug joke, only strengthened my resolve. It made the long, tedious hours I spent copying his emails and organizing his invoices feel less like a betrayal and more like a righteous, necessary act. He saw me as a punchline, a harmless, useless old woman pottering in her garden. He had no idea that with every laugh he was simply confirming the necessity of my actions. He was so busy admiring his own reflection that he couldn't see the tide was going out, leaving him stranded on the sand, exposed and vulnerable. His arrogance was not just a character flaw, it was a tactical error, and it was going to be his undoing. For months the fraud had operated with the smooth, silent efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Mark's confidence was absolute. Chloe's anxiety a low, manageable hum beneath the surface of their affluent lives. But no machine runs perfectly forever. The first sign of trouble, the first telltale rattle in the engine, came one Thursday evening. I was in my sewing room, a small, quiet space at the back of the house, mending a tear in one of Leo's old quilts. It was a peaceful, analog task that helped to quiet my mind after the hours I spent navigating the digital labyrinth of Mark's crimes. The window was open to the cool evening air, and I heard Chloe's car pull into the driveway much earlier than usual. A moment later, the back door slammed shut with a force that rattled the window pane. Her footsteps were frantic, heavy thuds on the hardwood floor of the hallway. Then I heard her voice, high-pitched and strained, laced with a raw, unfamiliar panic. Mark, are you here? We need to talk. Now." I put down my needle and thread, my entire body going still. I crept to the door of my sewing room and opened it just a crack, the small opening giving me a clear line of sound to the kitchen. Mark must have been home already, for his voice answered hers, low and irritated. "What is it, Chloe? I'm in the middle of a call." "Hang up," she snapped, her voice trembling. "Just hang up the phone, this is more important." I heard the muffled sound of Mark ending his call, followed by a heavy sigh. "This had better be good." "What's wrong with you?" "They've hired a new CFO," Chloe said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "He's from outside the company. A real hard ass, they're saying. And he's launching a full top-to-bottom internal audit. Of all departments, all accounts, going back 3 years. The silence that followed was heavy and profound. The cheerful chirping of the crickets outside my window seemed to amplify the sudden tense stillness in the house. "So?" Mark finally said, but the usual confident swagger was gone from his voice. He was trying to sound dismissive, but I could hear the undercurrent of unease. "Let them audit. We're clean. Everything is perfectly documented." "Documented where, Mark?" Chloe's voice rose, bordering on hysteria. "In a fake archive under my mother's name? What happens when they see millions of dollars in consulting fees being paid out of an account that's supposed to be for old client emails? What happens when they ask to speak to the owner of the account? What do we do then? Prop Mom up in a chair and hope for the best." "Calm down," Mark hissed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You're overreacting. It's an internal audit, not the FBI. They're looking for sloppy accounting, not a sophisticated corporate structure. It's all buried deep in the ghost account. No one can touch it. No one even knows how to look for it." "Ghost account?" The phrase sent a chill down my spine. That's what he called it. That's what he called me. A ghost. An invisible, non-existent entity whose name was just a cover for his crimes. The conversation confirmed everything I suspected, and validated every hour I had spent hunched over my tablet. "What if they do, Mark?" Chloe was crying now, her voice thick with sobs. "What if they find it? We could lose everything. Our jobs, the house, everything." "They won't find it," Mark said, his voice regaining some of its familiar arrogant steel. "Because the person whose name is on it can't even work a computer. Remember, it's the perfect cover. Now pull yourself together. You're falling apart over nothing." I heard his footsteps moving away, and then the sound of the back door opening and closing again. He had gone outside, leaving her to her tears. I retreated from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I sat back down in my chair, the forgotten quilt in my lap. The crack in their facade had appeared. The panic was setting in, and I had heard the name of my prison, the name of my weapon, the ghost account. They thought it was their greatest protection. They had no idea it was about to become their tomb. The overheard conversation was a turning point. It had confirmed my suspicions, but it had also introduced a new, chilling possibility. What if the emails, as damning as they were, weren't enough? Mark was slippery. He was a master of plausible deniability. I could imagine him in a boardroom, coolly explaining away the digital paper trail as a misunderstanding, a clerical error, or most likely a malicious attack on the part of a confused elderly woman. I needed something more. I needed his voice. I needed his arrogance, his contempt, his casual confession captured and preserved. I needed evidence that couldn't be explained away. My next lesson with Leo had a new, carefully crafted objective. "Leo, dear," I said, as he was showing me a new photo editing app. "I was thinking about your grandfather. I have so many stories about him, about our life together. I worry I'll start to forget them as I get older. Is there a way to record my voice on this tablet so I can save the stories for you?" The request, wrapped in the warm, sentimental gauze of family memory, was perfect. Leo's face softened. "Grandma, that's a great idea. Of course. There's a voice memo app that's super easy to use. Here, let me show you." He opened a simple app with a large red record button. "You just tap this to start," he explained, "and this to stop. The recordings save automatically. You can even name them so you know which story is which." We practiced for a few minutes. I recorded myself telling a short, funny story about Richard and a disastrous fishing trip. Leo listened, laughing at the right parts. The quality was surprisingly clear. It was perfect. The opportunity came the following week. Mark stopped by on a Wednesday evening. An unusual time for him. He claimed he was there to drop off some financial documents for Chloe to look over. But I knew the real reason. He was nervous. The audit was clearly weighing on him, and he was checking on his ghost account, making sure his silent, clueless accomplice was still playing her part. He found me in the living room, reading a book. "Agnes, everything okay?" he asked, his attempt at nonchalance failing miserably. "Perfectly fine, Mark," I replied, looking up over my reading glasses. "Just enjoying a quiet evening." My tablet was sitting on the end table next to my armchair. Exactly as I had planned, it was partially obscured by a stack of magazines, its dark screen inert and unassuming. But it wasn't off. It was on, with the voice memo app open, waiting. Mark's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, and a look of annoyance crossed his face. "I have to take this," he muttered, turning his back to me and walking toward the large bay window seeking the illusion of privacy. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. My hand trembled as I reached for the tablet, my fingers fumbling behind the magazines. With a silent prayer, I tapped the screen where I knew the big red button was. A tiny red light, almost invisible in the dimming evening light, began to pulse on the screen. It was recording. Mark's voice was low, a venomous whisper. What? No. I told you not to call me on this line. I don't care. Listen to me. The audit is a nothing burger. Just stick to the story. The payments were for legitimate overseas consulting. Of course there's no record of the consultants. That's the whole point. They're ghosts. Just like the archive account they're paid from. Yes. The old lady's account. It's perfect. Untraceable. If anyone ever finds it, we just play dumb. Blame it on a hacker. Or better yet, on her. She's half senile anyway. No one would ever believe she wasn't either a victim or a willing accomplice who forgot she was involved. She's the perfect firewall. He listened for another moment, then let out a short, ugly laugh. Relax. I've got everything under control. The useless old woman is going to make us very, very rich. He ended the call and turned back to me, his charming mask sliding back into place. Sorry about that. Work stuff. No bother at all, I said, my voice miraculously steady. He left a few minutes later, completely oblivious. As soon as I heard his car pull away, I reached for the tablet, my hand shaking uncontrollably now. I stopped the recording. There it was. A 3-minute audio file. I named it Firewall. 4A. I played it back, my own heart pounding in my ears. His voice clear as day filled the silent room, spilling his crimes, his contempt and his entire strategy onto the record. It was the final irrefutable piece of the puzzle. It was the unseen evidence, and it was going to be the nail in his coffin. The internal audit, which had been a source of such panic for Chloe, came and went with barely a ripple. Mark's confidence, it seemed, had been well-founded. His scheme was too well hidden, buried too deep in the corporate structure for a standard accounting review to uncover. For a few weeks, a tense calm settled over the family. Mark's arrogance returned, more potent than ever, while Chloe's anxiety subsided, replaced by a weary, guilty relief. They believed they had weathered the storm. They were wrong. They had mistaken a single wave for the tsunami that was about to hit. The news broke not through a panicked phone call but on the evening news. I was sitting in my living room, half watching a local news broadcast when a familiar glass and steel building appeared on the screen. It was the headquarters of Mark's company, Viridian Logistics. Developing story tonight, the news anchor said, her voice grave. Federal investigators have launched a major probe into one of the state's largest logistics firms, Viridian Logistics. Sources say the investigation centers on allegations of a multi-year, multi-million-dollar fraud scheme involving shell corporations and offshore accounts. My teacup rattled in its saucer. My breath caught in my throat. It was happening. It was real. The report continued, showing footage of grim-faced men and women in dark suits carrying boxes out of the building. The company's stock was in freefall. A grim-faced corporate lawyer read a terse no-comment statement. My phone rang, shattering the sudden silence of the room. It was Chloe. I let it ring 3 times before answering, composing my voice into a tone of mild confusion.
Hello?
Mom? Mom? Are you watching the news? Her voice was a high, panicked squeal. She was hyperventilating. The news? Yes, dear. I was just watching. Something about that company you and Mark work for. It sounds terrible. Terrible? It's a catastrophe. She shrieked. The feds are here, Mom. They're tearing the place apart. They're interviewing everyone. Mark is locked in a meeting with the board. Oh my God. What are we going to do? Well, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, Chloe. I said, my voice a calm counterpoint to her hysteria. You and Mark haven't done anything wrong, have you? The question hung in the air between us. A poisoned dart. There was a moment of sputtering silence on her end. Of course not, she finally said, but her denial was weak, unconvincing even to her own ears. It's a nightmare, Mom. A total nightmare. Mark, however, remained a fortress of smug confidence. He called me later that evening. His voice was tight but not with fear. With anger. Agnes, he said, dispensing with any pleasantries. I'm sure Chloe has called you, blubbering about the news. She did seem rather upset. Yes, I replied. Listen to me, he said, his voice low and intense. This is nothing. It's a fishing expedition. They have no idea what they're looking for. The ghost account is completely firewalled. They will never find it, but if, and I mean if, by some 1 in a billion chance, anyone ever asks you about that email account, you know nothing. You're a confused old woman who barely knows how to turn on a light switch. Do you understand me? I think so, Mark, I stammered, playing my part to the very end. Good, he snapped, and hung up. He was so certain, so utterly convinced of his own genius and my incompetence. He believed the ghost account was a shield. He couldn't see that the investigation wasn't a threat to his shield. It was a spotlight, and it was heading directly toward the one person he had so foolishly named as its keeper. The official investigation had begun. The endgame was in motion, and the knock on my door, I knew, was not far away. 2 days later it happened. I had been expecting it, yet the sound still sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. It wasn't a friendly tap, but a firm, authoritative rap on my front door that echoed through the quiet house. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters. I took a moment to smooth my apron to calm the frantic beating of my heart. I walked to the door, my steps measured, and looked through the peephole. 2 figures stood on my porch, a man and a woman, both dressed in impeccably tailored, sober dark suits. They held no clipboards, no sales pamphlets. They held only an air of quiet, unshakable authority. I opened the door. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice betraying just the right amount of grandmotherly befuddlement. The woman, who had sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing, held up a badge. "Ma'am, my name is Special Agent Phillips, and this is Special Agent Davies. We're with the FBI. Are you Agnes Reed?" "Yes, I am," I said, my hand fluttering to my chest in a gesture of surprise. "Goodness me, the FBI, has something happened?" "We'd like to ask you a few questions, if you don't mind," Agent Davies said, his voice polite but firm. "It's in regards to an ongoing investigation into Viridian Logistics." As if on cue, a car pulled into my driveway. It was Chloe and Mark. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't part of my plan. "We took the liberty of asking your daughter and son-in-law to be present," Agent Phillips explained, her sharp eyes watching my reaction. "As Mr. Davies is a key executive at the company, we felt his presence would be helpful." Helpful? I understood immediately. This wasn't just a preliminary interview. This was a confrontation. They had already connected the dots. They had traced the digital breadcrumbs back to this house, to me, and now they were here to see who would flinch first. I ushered them all into my living room, the same room where Mark had made his incriminating phone call. The air was thick with a tense, formal silence. Chloe was pale as a sheet, her eyes wide with terror, while Mark had composed his face into a mask of concerned cooperation. He was playing the part of the helpful executive, eager to assist the authorities in rooting out any corporate malfeasance. The investigators sat on my floral sofa, which looked suddenly small and frivolous beneath their imposing presence. Chloe and Mark sat in the 2 armchairs opposite them. I remained standing, a frail-looking old woman in an apron, hovering near the fireplace. Agent Phillips began, her voice calm and direct. "Mrs. Reed, our forensic accounting team has uncovered a series of highly irregular transactions originating from Viridian Logistics. These transactions, totaling over $8 million, were funneled through a network of shell corporations and ultimately paid out from a single primary email account." She paused, letting the weight of the number hang in the air. Chloe made a small, choking sound. "That email account," Agent Phillips continued, her eyes locking onto mine, "is Agnes Reed, archive@email.com. It is registered in your name, at this address, and was set up from an IP address that traces back to this house. Can you tell us about that, Mrs. Reed?" The moment had arrived. All the planning, all the secret lessons, all the meticulous archiving had led to this single pivotal question. The knock at the door had been answered. Now it was time to see who was truly on trial. The question hung in the pristine air of my living room, a bomb waiting to detonate. 4 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, the 2 investigators, their gazes sharp and analytical. Chloe, her eyes wide with a desperate, pleading terror, and Mark, whose expression was a carefully crafted masterpiece of shocked disbelief. Before I could even open my mouth to answer, Mark shot to his feet. He was a consummate performer, and he had clearly been rehearsing this role in his mind for days. "My God," he breathed, his voice a perfect blend of horror and dawning realization. He turned to the investigators, his hands outstretched in a gesture of helpless appeal. "Agents, there has to be a terrible mistake. Agnes? My mother-in-law?" He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "With all due respect," She wouldn't know an email from a postage stamp. We set that account up for her a while ago. Just so she could save recipes, you know? Keep in touch with a few old friends. The fact that criminals could have targeted her, could have hacked her account to perpetrate something like this. It's sickening. He walked over to me and placed a proprietary hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look protective but felt like a brand. She's a wonderful woman, but she is from a different generation. She's the victim here, agents. 100%. It was a brilliant performance. In a single impassioned speech, he had painted a complete, compelling, and utterly false narrative. He had cast me as the clueless, incompetent victim, a pawn in a sophisticated cybercrime, and in doing so he had thrown me directly and mercilessly under the bus. Agent Phillips' gaze shifted from Mark to Chloe. Mrs. Davies, is this your understanding of the situation as well? Chloe, who looked like she was about to faint, could only nod numbly. Her face was ashen. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. My mother, she gets confused. She couldn't, her voice trailed off. Her betrayal quieter than her husband's, but no less absolute. She had chosen her side. She had chosen him. I felt a profound, bottomless sadness wash over me, a grief for the daughter I had lost not to death, but to weakness and fear. Mark, emboldened by his wife's compliance and the investigator's silence, pressed his advantage. Look, we want to help in any way we can, he said, turning back to the agents. Now the picture of corporate responsibility. We'll give you access to our internal servers, whatever you need. We want to find the monsters who did this, who used an innocent old woman to cover their tracks, just as much as you do. He was magnificent, he was a snake, charming and deadly, and he was coiling himself around a narrative that was on its surface completely plausible. He was leveraging the very stereotype he had so carefully cultivated for me, the useless old woman, the perfect scapegoat. The investigators listened to his performance without expression. Their faces were unreadable masks of professional neutrality. They let the silence stretch after he finished. The only sound in the room the frantic shallow breathing of my daughter. Mark had played his final card. He had laid out his story, his perfect plausible lie. He had betrayed me utterly, counting on my weakness, my confusion, my silence. He looked at me, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought the game was over. He was about to find out it had only just begun. After Mark's impassioned, duplicitous performance, the room settled into a tense, expectant silence. He remained standing, a righteous protector shielding his poor, confused mother-in-law from the harsh realities of the modern world. Chloe was a statue of fear in her armchair. The investigators just watched, their gazes missing nothing. Finally, Agent Phillips turned her full attention back to me. Her voice was softer now, but it had lost none of its steely authority. She was ignoring Mark, dismissing him as one might dismiss a buzzing fly. She was speaking to the person at the heart of the matter. Mrs. Reed, she said, her eyes holding mine. Your son-in-law has offered one explanation, but these are very serious allegations, and the evidence has led us to your doorstep. We need to hear it from you. We need to know who is responsible for the activity on this account. This was it. The moment of truth. The culmination of months of secret study, of meticulous archiving, of enduring the constant casual cruelty of their underestimation. My family was watching me, expecting tears, a quavering voice, a confused denial. They were waiting for the useless old woman to play her part. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I gently shrugged Mark's hand off my shoulder, a small gesture of emancipation that made him flinch. I straightened my back. My past as a bookkeeper, a woman who had faced down auditors and hostile executives for 40 years, rose to the surface. The frail grandmotherly facade I had so carefully constructed dissolved, replaced by the quiet, unshakable confidence of a professional who has all her numbers in order. I took a step forward, away from Mark, into the center of the room. My voice when I spoke was not the reedy whisper they were used to. It was clear, calm, and resonated with a strength they had never heard before. I am the owner of that email account, I stated simply. The effect was instantaneous. A wave of profound relief washed over Mark's face. He thought I was confessing, or at least confessing to an ownership that would cement my status as the clueless victim. He even managed a small, sad smile, a look that said, "See, she doesn't even know what she's admitting to." Chloe let out a small, choked sob, burying her face in her hands. The investigators, however, did not react. They simply waited. They knew there was more. I held up a hand, a gesture that commanded the room. Let me be perfectly clear, I said, my gaze sweeping from the agents to my daughter, and finally landing on my son-in-law. I am the owner of the account. I am the only person who has had access to it for the past 6 months, and I know everything that has gone on in it. The relief on Mark's face curdled, replaced by a dawning horrified confusion. This was not in his script. The useless old woman was not following her lines. I stood there at the quiet center of the storm I had created. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, not as a mother, not as a widow, not as a relic, but as Agnes Reed, a woman who was about to balance the books, once and for all. The turning point had been reached. It was time to present my findings. However, I continued, my calm, clear voice slicing through the stunned silence of the room. I am not the perpetrator of the fraud, but I do know who is. I turned away from my speechless family and walked over to the small antique writing desk that stood in the corner of the room. From the top drawer I retrieved my purse. My movements were unhurried. My hands perfectly steady. All the nervous energy I had felt before was gone, replaced by a cold, righteous certainty. I unclasped the purse and took out a small black object. It was a simple USB flash drive, the kind Leo had shown me how to use. It was so small, so insignificant, yet I knew it held the crushing weight of their entire world. I walked back to the center of the room and held it out to Agent Phillips. On this drive, I said, my voice as precise and clinical as if I were delivering a year-end financial report, you will find a complete and meticulously organized record of the fraud perpetrated by my son-in-law, Mark Davies, with the complicity of my daughter Chloe Davies. Mark made a strangled sputtering noise, a sound of pure panicked disbelief. What are you talking about? That's insane. She's confused. She doesn't know what she's saying. Agent Phillips ignored him completely. She took the USB drive from me, her sharp eyes studying my face, a flicker of what looked like grudging respect in their depths. I continued my presentation. The drive contains several folders. In the first you will find every fraudulent email sent to or from the Agnes Reed archive account, forwarded with their original time-stamped headers intact. In the second folder you will find the corresponding doctored invoices, falsified bills of lading, and forged expense reports that were attached to those emails. I've also taken the liberty of cross-referencing them in a separate spreadsheet, highlighting the specific discrepancies and the corresponding illegal fund transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Chloe was now staring at me, her face a mask of utter uncomprehending horror. It was as if she were seeing me for the first time, a stranger in her mother's body. And finally I said, delivering the coup de grace, in the third folder you will find an audio file. It is a recording of a phone call made by Mr. Davies in this very room in which he details the cover-up, his use of the ghost account, and his strategy of using his useless half-senile mother-in-law as a perfect firewall in case of discovery. I believe you'll find it all quite organized. Agent Davies, who had been silent up to this point, took the USB drive from his partner. He pulled a laptop from his briefcase, inserted the drive and began to navigate its contents. The room was deathly quiet, the only sound the soft clicking of the laptop's keys. I watched Mark's face. The charming, confident mask had not just cracked, it had disintegrated. His skin was the color of wet cement, his eyes wide and darting around the room like a trapped animal looking for an escape that wasn't there. He was looking at me, at the frail old woman he had mocked and dismissed, and seeing not a victim but his executioner. The proof had been delivered. The evidence, a silver bullet of my own making, was now in the hands of the authorities. The revelation was complete. All that was left was the reckoning. The effect of the USB drive was instantaneous and absolute. Agent Davies, his face grim, turned the laptop screen toward his partner. She watched for a moment, then nodded. The silent, professional exchange was more damning than any shout could have been. The evidence was a silver bullet, and it had found its mark. Agent Phillips stood up, her gaze fixed on Mark, who seemed to have shrunk into his expensive suit. Mark Davies, she said, her voice cold and formal, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering and obstruction of justice. She then turned to my daughter, whose face had crumpled into a mask of tear-streaked despair. Chloe Davies, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and obstruction of justice. The world seemed to slow down. The clicking of handcuffs, the recitation of their rights, the stunned, silent tears rolling down Chloe's face. It all happened in a surreal muted haze. Mark didn't protest, he didn't speak. All the bluster, all the arrogant charm had been stripped away, leaving behind a hollow, defeated shell of a man. As they were led out of my home, Chloe looked back at me one last time, her eyes asking a question I could not answer, a question filled with a lifetime of regret. I simply met her gaze, my own face a mask of sorrowful resolve. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings. The evidence I had provided was ironclad, faced with the irrefutable digital paper trail, and the sound of his own voice confessing his crimes. Mark had no choice but to cooperate. He and Chloe lost everything. Their plea deal required them to forfeit all assets deemed to be the proceeds of their crimes. Their house, their cars, their savings, their investment portfolios. They lost their jobs, of course. Their names and faces splashed across the news in a humiliating spectacle of corporate greed. Brought down, Mark received a hefty prison sentence. Chloe, due to her lesser role and cooperation, received a lighter sentence, but her life as she knew it was over. I saw none of it firsthand. I remained in my quiet house, a silent witness to the fallout. The only person I saw was Leo. His parents' downfall had devastated him, but he was a resilient boy with a core of integrity that they had somehow failed to corrupt. He moved in with me, his quiet presence filling the lonely halls of the house. One sunny afternoon, a few months later, Leo and I were in the garden. I was teaching him how to prune the roses, a skill my Richard had taught me decades ago. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the snip of the shears and the buzzing of bees the only sounds. "You know," Leo said suddenly, not looking at me, his focus intent on a stubborn branch, "I always knew you were smart." "Grandma, Dad." He was just too arrogant to see it. I stopped my work and looked at my grandson. He was a good boy, a good man in the making. The family's true honor, the legacy of decency and hard work that Richard and I had tried to build, was safe with him. "Your father saw what he wanted to see, Leo," I said softly. "People who underestimate you don't define who you are. They simply reveal who they are." I had not sought this path. I had not wished for their destruction, but they had mistaken my quietness for weakness, my age for incompetence. They had built a cage for me out of their contempt, never realizing I was the one who held the key. They had lost more than their jobs and their money. They had lost their family, their integrity, and their future, all because they laughed at a woman they called useless. I snipped a final withered rose from its stem, letting it fall to the earth. The family's honor had been defended, not in a boardroom or a courtroom, but in the quiet, methodical clicks of a woman who simply decided it was time to balance the books. The reckoning was complete. Thank you for watching.